Morning, everyone. My name's Peter Tabbins. Bonjour tout le monde. Je m'appelle Peter Tabbins. I'm the MPP for Toronto-Danforth and the Ontario NDP Shadow Minister for the Environment. As you're all well aware, the Ford government can always find $30 million for a private luxury jet for the Premier, and some really cozy time with lobbyists at fancy fundraisers. But he doesn't seem to be able to find time or money to deal with the climate impacts that Ontarians are having to handle now and will have to handle in the future. The cost of the Premier's inaction will be severe and will be paid by hardworking Ontarians. As temperatures rise, so too will the costs of food, housing, and insurance. Workers will be endangered on the job by sweltering heat, and people will be endangered by the heightened risk of wildfires. Today, along with three colleagues, MPPs West, Bell, and Wong Tam, I'm introducing a private member's bill adapting to a hotter Ontario. It provides a start on preparing Ontario for the hotter and riskier future that we're entering. We're joined by the president of the OFL, Laura Walton, remotely by a wildlands firefighter and vice president of OPSU Local 728, Eric Davidson, and by Dr. Jennifer Penny, chair of the Adaptation Working Group for Seniors for Climate Action Now, whose efforts a few years ago unearthed the province's buried climate change assessment report. The bill consolidates three acts, one that sets out a framework for Ontario to plan for and act to protect lives and property from the hotter world we're entering, one that revises the Occupational Health and Safety Act to protect the health and safety of workers who are laboring in increasingly dangerous overheated conditions, and one that starts the process of planning for and preventing urban wildfires in Ontario. President Walton, Mr. Davidson, and Dr. Penny will speak to the risks we're facing and why we need to act. Along with our guests, my three colleagues and I will be happy to help answer any questions you may have after their presentations. Doug Ford has a responsibility to protect the people of Ontario from the impacts of climate change. By supporting this bill, he can take a meaningful step toward doing so. And with that, I turn the podium over to Laura Walton, president of the OFL, which represents over 1 million workers in Ontario.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you for joining us today. As mentioned, I do represent over 1 million workers and 54 unions in public, private, and the trade sector. And these workers are preparing for the really very real impacts of heat stress in our work sites already. For the past 2 years, working with the Ontario NDP and MPP Peter Tabbins, we've been raising the temperature on the need for heat stress legislation from this government. Summer after summer, workers have faced climbing temperatures in childcare centers, farms, construction sites, long-term care homes, kitchens, and diverse work sites throughout our province. Really, there is no worker who is immune to the potential heat stress with the summers that we are currently having. To date, we have heard that addressing heat stress is a matter of common sense and that workers have the right to refuse unsafe work, as though it's something that easy. These are not solutions. These are statements that show that the government's disconnect with the issue and the lack of ability to hold employers accountable to the very foundational piece of occupational health and safety in our province. Employers must take all steps reasonable to keep workers safe. And I need to be clear. This bill is not solely for workers, but for every person who resides in Ontario. Our working conditions are the living, learning, growing, and participating conditions for us all. From sweltering classrooms to poorly ventilated and unregulated long-term care rooms, from the sweltering shop floor to the burning heat of a job site, the heat is a hazard that many cannot escape, especially with the climate crisis that worsens every single year. We are turning up the heat on this government and all MPPs to step forward and to pass this legislation without delay. Workers and people die in our province from extreme heat. That is shameful. We need action now. And we'll now hear from Eric Davidson, who is joining us remotely.
Hi, good morning. My name is Eric Davidson, OPSI Local 728 Vice President. I'm joining you from all the way up in Red Lake, Ontario. And I was invited here to speak as a representative of the wildland firefighter profession in Ontario. I've served directly on over 100 wildfires and in support roles on many more. Today I wanted to talk about readiness. Another fire season is starting, and we're at about 70% capacity. We weren't ready 10 years ago, we aren't ready today, and we won't be ready tomorrow without meaningful change. We're living on borrowed time when it comes to wildfires going into our cities and towns. Our luck is going to run out if we don't take a more proactive approach to preventing and managing the negative impacts of wildland fire. And legislation like this new bill would help us get on track. And when we're talking about 70% capacity, that's not just staffing. We're looking at experience levels that have been lower, that have never been lower than at any point in the past. And so legislation like this, with regards to getting involved with prevention, would really go a long way with helping us kind of get on track with this heat illness and a lot of the other issues impacting wildland firefighters today. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric. And now, Dr. Jennifer Penny, Chair of the Seniors for Climate Action Now Adaptation Working Group and a key author of the adaptation framework piece of this bill. Dr. Penny?
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. Good morning, everyone. Before I retired, my job for many years was to do research to understand the risks that climate change creates for Ontario cities and regions, and to develop and promote plans and strategies to protect us, our communities, and our natural environment from the impacts. This research led me to understand that we have to reduce emissions, but that is no longer enough. Greenhouse gases in the atmosphere have a long life. They're not going away anytime soon. Even if we were to reduce net emissions to zero, which doesn't seem likely in the near future, it's going to get hotter for the next century or more, and a hotter atmosphere and hotter oceans are already leading to more extreme weather. We all know this. We haven't really hit the heat season yet, though we had a few days a couple of weeks ago on my son's farm that were sweltering. With a potentially severe El Nino approaching, we can expect more heat waves. And it's not enough to say to individuals and families, lower your blinds, drink lots of water, go to a cooling center. We saw where this led for the 619 people who died in BC during the 2021 heat dome. We have had floods already this spring. As they rise, we can't keep putting the burden on individuals to make sure that their homes or businesses are flood-proof. The tornado season started with a bang a couple of weeks ago, and it's likely to continue. Tornadoes are expanding in their numbers and the areas that they will hit in Ontario. And as the wildfires that have decimated our forests in the previous 2 years start up again, it's not enough to warn people to clear flammable materials away from their houses to stay safe. Some people have the means to follow the advice, to know the hazards and what to do, but many, many more do not. The vulnerable include people who live in what are essentially urban deserts, surrounded by asphalt and concrete. They are renters whose apartments get 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 degrees hotter than the outdoor temperatures that trigger heat alerts. They may work outdoors as roofers, road workers, or farm workers, or in hot indoor environments, as Laura has said. They may attend school or childcare in buildings without cooling or good ventilation. They may be old, like me, and have medical problems to take medications that make them more susceptible to heat and less able to cope with storms and power outages. They live in areas susceptible to flooding, especially as rainfall gets more intense and stormwater infrastructure ages, and the conservation authorities, whose job it is to protect us from flooding, are weakened. Their basements or basement apartments fill with water and sewage. Insurance companies won't cover floods anymore, or many of them, and many people can't afford insurance in any case. The main job of governments are to keep their people safe. From wars in the case of national governments, from lawlessness, from epidemics, from disasters, and dare I say it, from climate change. In the early days of this government, The government commissioned several major reports asking adaptation and resilience experts to identify current and future damages of climate change and to suggest what the province could do to protect us. Only one of these reports, of 5, the Provincial Climate Change Impact Assessment, has been made public in 1923, and that was under pressure from our organization, Seniors for Climate Action Now. The other reports have been suppressed, including an adaptation best practices reports that identified hundreds of actions being successfully implemented in other jurisdictions to decrease climate impacts. This is unconscionable. I'm not saying that making people safe from climate impacts is an easy job. It is not. The solutions take time to plan and to implement. They require the government to admit that climate change exists. The solutions require analysis of specific risks, the development of a strategy, and the commitment of resources. The bill which Peter is introducing today, the Adapting to a Hotter Ontario Act, lays out a plan and a strategy that this government needs to safeguard us from the impacts of climate change. The bill is long and detailed, as a serious plan for adaptation and resilience requires. Still, it's quite a bit shorter than a lot of the omnibus bills that the government has been introducing in the last several years. I really hope that that the length and the detail do not deter journalists listening today from reporting on the bill, informing the public about its contents, and urging the government to pass it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Penny.
Oops.
Sorry, Jim.
Sorry.
Traffic jams, even here. Does anyone have any questions?
I have a few. I won't ask too many questions about the contents of the bill. It sounds lengthy, and it may better serve just reading it.
There's a very good summary at the beginning of each schedule.
I love that. But I did want to ask about the heat stress section, and maybe you can talk a little bit about what's being proposed or what the government needs to do to address that particular issue.
I will comment very briefly, and then Laura. It requires the government to put in place a framework for protection in each workplace. It directs the government to put in place regulations to protect workers, both in terms of the way the workplace is organized and how workers are treated, and it provides for enforcement of those regulations. And with that, I'll turn it over to Laura.
You know, sadly, last year when we brought this forward, Minister Piccini commented in the House right after it saying, well, this is common sense and every worker has the right to refuse. Simply put, every worker doesn't have the right to refuse, but that puts the onus of dealing with heat stress on the worker themselves rather than putting it where it properly belongs, which is ensuring that employers are taking every reasonable precaution to keep workers safe. I just was down underground with the minister in Sudbury where it's hot. And, they have great protocols because people like Jamie West have fought to ensure that those protocols are in place to keep those workers safe. And I said to the minister, look, you can do this. And he said, well, I'm concerned about the productivity. And I asked, the people who were standing there, because we were with management, and I said, have you seen your productivity drop because you're ensuring that there are cooling centers and electrolyte freezies and people can take breaks? And they said, no, if anything, the productivity has increased. So we need to stop using excuses. And we need to, in this bill, what we're calling on is let's do the right thing. Let's stop assuming that people are going to, be able or have the strength to speak up to their employer and say, I'm hot, before it's too late. Let's put the regulations in and ensure that workers are safe. Because when we keep workers safe, we keep communities safe.
Jennifer?
I'd like to speak to this too, because there are in this bill 2 sections. There is one that's a very good section that is specific to workplace heat, and that is what Laura has been addressing. But there's also a section that looks more at general community issues with respect to heat, and it includes 9 different senior moment getting in here. What's the word I'm looking for? 9 provisions for addressing heat in the general community. It includes things like actually tracking heat-related deaths and morbidity, which this government does not do, though BC and Quebec seem to be able to do it. It requires that official plans for municipalities include strategies to assess and reduce urban heat islands, which can raise temperatures for city centers to be 6, 7, or 8 degrees higher than in surrounding rural areas. It looks at assessing the need for schools and for childcare centers, for hospitals and other publicly funded institutions that accommodate large numbers of people, and to develop a strategy with targets and deadlines. It talks about something that tenants groups across Ontario have been arguing for with municipalities, to set maximum temperature bylaws for rental housing of 26 degrees C and keep people safe, which a lot of municipalities have been looking at, but they keep saying, we need the information, we need the recommendations from the provincial government to actually be able to put these things into place. And we need funds for owners of apartment buildings and rental housing to actually install new air conditioning units, heat pumps, and so on. So there's a number of other provisions. I won't go into them all, but the heat stress is a very important issue that we do need to address in the community and in the workplace.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yes. Kind of on that note, I believe earlier this session at a committee meeting, the officials said that the government was not studying the impact of climate change on infrastructure. And I'm wondering what kind of impact that has on everything that you're talking about here.
Well, in fact, passage of this bill would require the assessment of infrastructure deficits and a plan for putting in the investments to deal with that, and set up an infrastructure fund, an adaptation fund to actually put the money where it's needed. The Financial Accountability Office a few years ago took a look at infrastructure in Ontario, concluded that we were looking at many billions of dollars worth of costs if we did not do preventive work to adapt. Much cheaper to adapt in advance than to deal with a bridge that's been swept away.
And I think my last question is Eric on the line, or maybe one of you can answer
Eric
for
is
him?
still on the line.
Okay,
So
if he can hear me.
just one sec. Control room, can you make sure that Eric's aware that the question is coming for him? Okay, that's great. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you for coming, remoting in. We're approaching wildfire season, and the next few months are usually the worst. I'm sure this bill will tackle past future seasons, but is there anything that kind of can be done in the media to help prepare for the next few months?
Eric, were you able to hear that question clearly?
Let me just, can you hear me? I can. So let me just repeat your question, just so I can make sure I understood it. In the next few months, wildfire season is going to be the worst, or kind of the worst portion that we see. Is there anything in the media that can be done to kind of assist that? Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
no, that's it. What can we do right now to prepare for the coming wildfire season? And in particular, what needs to be done that is not currently being done?
So with bills like this and with this sort of legislation being proposed, we're really excited to see this stuff. But at the end of the day, it's going to take a bipartisan effort to get something like this across the finish line. Because this is my 13th season doing this. Lots of things have been proposed, lots of promises have been made, but we haven't really seen anything get across the finish line. And so just even with the media, even with people in Southern Ontario, a lot of my friends that come up here from Toronto that have worked fire, a lot of them say that their families think that they're going to BC because nobody's really aware that there are even fires occurring in the north. And so just even raising that awareness, like a lot of times we'll hear about the smoke when it impacts Toronto or any other Southern Ontario city or community. But usually when that's happening, we're dealing with evacuations and stuff like that. And so we see the impacts of climate change a lot more acutely, perhaps not to take away from the impacts of smoke and climate change in the South, but a lot of times it's much more acute. It means evacuations. It means people leaving their homes, and just even raising awareness on the fact that our experience levels are so much lower. And I'll tie that back into the heat illness part. Heat illness disproportionately affects young and inexperienced firefighters. And anytime we have to do a medical response on a remote fire line, that means firefighting basically stops until that person's checked out as okay or is medevaced. And like I said, we're doing this in the middle of nowhere, and oftentimes that can take 2-3 hours of our time away from actually doing our job. So these sort of protections, getting some of this preventative measure in place goes a long way, as I think, a lot of times we've been reactive to a lot of the problems we've faced, and I think it's about time that we start being preventative to some of these problems that we're seeing. Hopefully that answers your question okay.
Eric, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Do we have any remote questions? No. Okay.
Peter, can I make a quick comment?
Absolutely.
I just want to, it was mentioned today, they talked about schools. And for most of us, we think of our kids at schools. And we default to, it's really warm, but within a month, less than a month, school will be out. And I think we need to recognize that schools are workplaces throughout the summer. This is when the custodians strip and wax the floors. This is when IT is in the ceiling running conduit and network cables. And so that really intense pressure and heat that you're finding right now in Toronto, in Sudbury, across Ontario, imagine that temperature all summer long. Those 30 plus days, there are people working inside enclosed buildings, in classrooms, with no air conditioning, with no supports. And that's why you need legislation. The minister's saying something like, just be careful or refuse work. That isn't a solution. It wasn't a solution to people falling from heights. It wasn't a solution to people getting hit on the head. There needs to be legislation specifically to help people in the same way that less than 10 years ago, there wasn't really any harassment guidelines. It was just make it work, right? And so you need that. You cannot treat health and safety as an afterthought, as it'll be fine, just be safe. We need to protect workers, make sure that they're safe. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for being here today, and look forward to the debate on the bill in the fall. Take care.